Yesterday's body count lottery rounded out to a solid and sturdy.
Hello, welcome to the next episode of the TJZ RambleCast. We are currently going to be focusing on Cyberpunk, so nice to have you back, Chumbas. How have you been doing?
Been doing good. We've been doing good. I'm really excited on discussing Cyberpunk Edgerunners on my end because I have not been introduced to the Cyberpunk 2077 game, even though I've watched Tatharis play it from, kind of a faraway view. But I did watch the anime on Netflix.
That's
Hey,
great.
Chummers, how are you? Yes, I just made a Shadowrun reference.
Yes.
Yes,
Chummer
you both did.
Remember Shadowrun, but they're very similar universes, to be fair. Mostly we're going to at least begin by talking about Edgerunners. And the reason we want to do that is we all watched it recently within the past 2 or 3 weeks, and I was genuinely surprised. I'm an old, cynical guy. I don't really have a lot of high expectations for a lot of what I watch, because I find if I keep my expectations low and then I'm pleasantly surprised, it's a better feeling rather, than the opposite. So I went in with low expectations, but I ended up really, really liking the show in a lot of different ways. It really sucked me in pretty much right away. And, the big reason for that is, I really liked and identified with characters. It was a lot more character focused than I expected, even though it was really great universe-wise, because if you have played Cyberpunk 2077, it is the exact same universe. You even get Wakako as the fixer. She's in that. You see a lot of the same sort of locations that you drive around in your car. You very much the same sort of feel in terms of culture.
There's lots of good references. Delamine, they have the random gangs in there. I agree.
Which is nice. That's just a sort of nod to the people that play it. And obviously this was commissioned as a sort of long commercial for Cyberpunk 2077. But you know what? You give me a commercial that's as entertaining as that, I'm going to be engaged with it. And honestly, that's a bit ironic given the hyper corporatized world of Cyberpunk, but such is the world that we live in, right?
I'm sure we'll come back around to that at some point. Yeah, and to tie into what you said earlier, like I think Zayn, or I think me probably primarily, I was the one that was pushing for everyone to do it. I think I went, hey dude, I keep hearing Edgerunners is good. Hey dude, another point we'll come back to later. It's increased them, like they've got a lot more downloads of 2077 because of this. We should see this. I keep hearing nothing but good things. And then you took the plunge and listened to it. And you were like, yeah, it's good. And I turned back to Zay. I'm like, okay, I know I keep saying this, but like we really need to go watch this now because this is going to be a great episode.
Yeah, he nagged the hell out of me to go watch it.
I'm sorry. I know I
really
was.
gave in.
Yes, the reason I started watching it was because of you, Tath. You had mentioned all of these things. And I was thinking, I don't know, another Netflix anime, generic anime, especially given that it's a derivative of another property. Like I grew up in the 80s, and anytime you had a video game based on a show, it was always horrible. And so I sort of grew to become distrustful of, universe tie-ins in terms of this media becoming this media as a tie-in to this other universe. So I really, that's another reason I had low expectations. I do like animes, but not really your average anime. There's a handful of really good ones out there, but a lot of generic ones, just like any other, Western media, I guess, right?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're all positive on the anime, right? The TLDR is if you haven't seen it, go see it. Do we all agree on that point right up front?
100%, yes.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I really liked about it, and if you haven't seen it, I would recommend going and seeing it because we're going to get a little bit spoilery here. I guess I already sort of did talking about what's similar to 2077, but
I mean, we just called out like decent inclusions, like Delamine. I mean, like the various gangs, yada yada.
Right.
I don't know that it's necessarily a spoiler. I mean, okay, I guess someone could go into Cyberpunk 27 or the anime and go, oh, that's Wakako. Who's that? I mean, okay.
It's not that big of a deal.
It doesn't really tell you anything.
Some people are really weird about spoilers, though. I've got a buddy who he doesn't want to hear anything about. He doesn't even like to watch trailers. That's how spoiler averse he is. So.
Well, to be fair, ever since the spoiler or the trailer spoiler, the one that where it was like the calls coming from inside the house. I mean, that was like the beginning of the end for spoilers. I mean, let's be fair. Like trailers, the people who make the trailers just make a cool thing. They don't care if they spoil the entire movie. So I can completely understand people not trusting those type of things. It just depends on what you're looking for. But if you've seen if you've played Cyberpunk 27, it doesn't follow the same plot. I think we start there, right? It's not the same plot, but it's definitely but I mean, it's definitely set in the same coherent universe design. So there's homages back and forth, but watching Edgerunners doesn't spoil Cyberpunk 2077 because it has its own plot. But if you want more Edgerunners, you can go to the video game and you'll get some more.
Sure, stylistically, it's very consistent with the game, which is always nice. I really like the sort of romance. Getting into more spoiler territory here. Between the two sort of main characters, there's this thing that happens with the color cinematography that I'd like to mention. Every time they have a love scene, there is this sort of neon outline around the characters' faces. There's a pink one and a green one, I imagine, for each character. But it's just that visual language that you see when that's happening. So once you see that happening, you know what's about to happen, and it's very consistent. It's very over the top stylized, which is very consistent with the universe as well. And I just love that. It was just one of those little things that I noticed, visual language wise.
That's interesting. I did not pick up on that in my watching. I may have been thinking other things, but that's kind of an interesting point. Did you notice any of that color stuff, Zay?
No, I actually did not notice it. So I was trying right now as you were talking about it, just trying to go back through it to see if maybe my mind memory brings it up. And no, I actually did not notice it. And that's going to make me want to rewatch it again. Because if there's that much detail as far as not only the story wise, but also the way that they handled displaying it to the viewer, that will enhance also more the viewing enjoyment for me.
That's great. Well, I'm glad to bring something that you guys haven't seen. I always really appreciate when somebody else does that to me, and I'm sure it's quite likely that you guys will have the same notes that I didn't pick up on. And that's the mark of a good show, right? That it's so dense with information and different things that you're not going to always pick up on.
I mean, there was a lot going on in that show.
There is.
The thing that got stuck in my head,
Uh-huh.
even though it was only played, I think, the one time.
What's
that one song that he plays that starts playing on like his first trip to the school when you're just getting the ambiance of the world, and that's the one. It goes the song was like the front refrain is something like, "My bank account is 000. Oh no!" I can't remember the rest of the song, but like that piece was just stuck in my head for days after.
The music selection in that game in general was great.
Agreed.
Far better than the music selection on the radio stations of Cyberpunk 2077. Much better. Which I'm just replaying it now. Actually, I'm near the end of Cyberpunk 2077, and I cannot think of one memorable bit of music at all. Which is
I just think they ran out of time to do that type of stuff. I mean, they have plenty of commercials that play. So there's that one announcer, I can't remember his name, that does a bunch of talk show stuff. Like they clearly did that, but I think they wanted to be GTA 5 in that respect, and they just didn't have enough time, and extra music and stations was one of the things that got left on the cutting floor.
Well, in terms of Cyberpunk 2077, one of the best things I like about just the general world building is the commercials, the ridiculousness of the commercials, and all of the ads all over the city. Like I remember seeing and we're talking about the game here. I remember seeing an ad for getting a car. Oh, only 21.8% APR for qualifying participants, right? Like that's pretty funny.
And they had that announcer that he does like a spot inside the anime. And it's very RoboCop-ish, which I think is a fantastic tie-in, because that's probably the one thing RoboCop did very, very well was those commercials.
RoboCop did a lot of things very well. But that's a topic for another discussion.
Agreed.
I loved RoboCop, the original RoboCop.
But to be fair, RoboCop is a dystopian future, just like Shadowrun or Cyberpunk. That's why I figured it was a good reference.
Absolutely is. And yeah, that's something, Verhoeven's works. I mean, that's something I could talk about, but we're not going to ramble quite that far. We're going to try to stick on the Cyberpunk.
Good luck.
I am supposed to be the moderator here, but when you're moderating a RambleCast, it's just kind of, you're spitting into the wind here. So
yeah, we just jump all over the place.
we do.
Even when you were talking about the stylistic of the outline of the people's faces, I was just thinking, for some reason, the series Hannibal entered into my mind because they had such a specific style for different type of moods and different type of scenes. It just made me think of that. But yes, we are rambling back to Cyberpunk.
Sure, back to Cyberpunk.
Can I bring up a quick topic on Edgerunners for this?
Sure. Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
2 words: the lolly.
Sure. So that was.
I really feel like she's deserving of a point, because in my mind, she is the true merging of 2 different genres and how successful it was. Because in anime, we all know, if you've watched any anime, lollies are a common thing. Personally, I'm not a big fan of them. I tolerate them sometimes, but they're something I could do without, right? They kind of go into that creepy side of Japanese culture. But the lolly that they made in here, I bought all the way through. It was like you took this anime trope, brought it into Cyberpunk, which is not an anime, but you're turning Cyberpunk into an anime, and you made this character who should be tropey as all get out. I should be barely tolerating her. I'm like, and she was one of my favorite characters, at least supporting characters in the anime.
I agree. I mean, the way that I see it, basically, and this is why Edgerunners is as good as it is. I mentioned it before, but character development is very solid in this show. And the reason that I think her name is Rebecca is such an interesting character is because she's fully developed. I mean, she's insane and off the wall, but she's not just a one-dimensional character. And I feel like a lot of lollies and other sort of side characters in a lot of animes are just very one note, very one-dimensional.
Yeah, I would have loved to have more time with her and her brother to find out what the hell is their backstory, but ultimately they're side characters, and it's an anime, and it has there's a lot of cuts the way that animes can be. There's a lot of stuff left on that you just don't get to see. But
the way that she really latches on to David, the main character, when her brother dies, is nice and relatable, and how she kind of knew that he was going to go off the edge, but she really desperately wanted to hold him back, but at the same time wanted to hold up this front of being a very tough person. There's some depth there, which I liked. And really, another interesting, you're talking about the merging of Cyberpunk and anime. It was interesting how she had some kind of like synth skin on that was like this weird kind of pale, like greenish color or whatever, with this weird like tattoo. And, it very stylistically both anime and very Cyberpunk, which was cool.
Yeah, I'm surprised she wasn't a cyber psycho, because I mean,
yeah, right.
She's clearly, I mean, her brother's got to be probably in his 20s or 30s. I mean, nondescript, you can't really tell, right? But but at least his body looks like he's a 20-ish or 30-ish year old person, roughly. Yes, she could be younger, but I highly doubt she's 16, right? Her body may have stopped at that age, but why did she do that? I have a lot of questions about what she did. She's almost to the point of like Ghost in the Shell level, full body transfusion, but that's a core concept of the cyber psychosis theme in Edgerunners to begin with. How did she not go crazy with the amount of cyberware she had to have? Is it just because it's basically replacing her limbs but not doing crazy other things? So her body is mostly, yes, cybertronic, but not doing she's not implanting rocket launchers in her body or something.
The way that I saw it, most of her implants were cosmetic more than anything else, because really she just focused on her dual shotguns, right?
Yeah, but
so that's the way that I
still
thought.
stunted her growth, right? That's kind of what I'm getting at. So like,
Well, I think that in the Cyberpunk 2077 universe, and I'm only saying this because I'm replaying it right now,
Sure.
there's a lot of these implants that literally make you look younger. Like that, the whole point of the implant is to make you look 20 years younger or whatever. So I'm guessing that she's,
so she's got some implant that just sends in certain types of vitamins, whatever nutrients or whatever that just halt her growth process.
I don't know, but
It's a
that's
theory,
what I
it's a
would
good theory.
imagine thinking, given that, because of course, a lot of these animes are that way, right? No, she's not a loli. She's 1,000-year-old vampire, which just gagged me with that stupid.
She's
shit,
clearly
but-
not that, but I would buy
Yeah.
that she's a 43-year-old woman. Like I totally believe
Sure.
that character is that old.
Sure, I would agree with that.
Well, there's something that you mentioned, Tatharis, as far as with regarding to the loli, and regarding cyberpsychosis, and it's something that it begs to kind of pose the question: is it being induced because of the fact that the more changes that you're making and modifications that you're making to the body that deviate from an actual human form creates that situation in your brain as a separation from actually being able to see yourself as human anymore?
There's a couple parts, and this is me reading between lines, and I'd love someone to correct me, someone who actually knows the background of cyberpunk as a whole. But so they take drugs that offset, so that help halt cyberpsychosis, right? Like the immuno thing. So there seems like there's two parts. Part of it is your body rejecting it, and the other part I think kind of plays into what you're talking about. So it's like you take these drugs that keep your body from rejecting the implants, but also your brain is you've lost too much of your humanity. I mean, I'm more familiar from the Shadowrun game system, which also has this thing called essence. Shadowrun has magic. The only magic in Cyberpunk is like technomancer type stuff. But if your essence rating in the Shadowrun world goes too low, they become a cyber zombie. It's the same thing as cyberpsychosis, effectively. So I can only speak to it from that perspective, right? You don't have enough left of you that's human.
Right.
So your body just goes into like crazy mode because it just doesn't. You don't react to a normal human unless you're Atom Smasher, who is the Mary Sue who breaks all the rules of all of these things.
Right, because
Sure.
even in the show, the Netflix show, there's a certain point, and I'm not going to go into spoilery stuff at this moment.
Jaedaen and I will do that for you at some point.
Thank
Continue.
you. That's right. There's a certain point that something happens, and this is towards the later half of the show, that it brings up to the question, are you even human anymore? And is that something that might be what actually drives that cyberpsychosis to come up? Because what is your identity anymore? Who are you? What are you if you're mostly parts, and some of these parts can be, different weaponry, different, a sword or a gun or anything that is not described as human.
So I have a
And
sort of
organic.
take. I have a take on cyberpsychosis. Playing the game, right? Basically, the consensus is nobody really knows. Nobody understands it. It's a newer, even though it's been around for 50 years, but we'll put that aside. Part of society that is this ill that's happening that nobody really understands. But the way that I see it is it's a metaphor for addiction in general. And the way that I see addiction is not about the actual substance that you're taking that ruins your life, but rather the state of mind that you're in that causes you to fall into addiction, that has to do mostly with needing mental health, therapy and all of that, to resolve some issues with your life that's they're making you more isolated from people, a lack of connection, and you see that with cyberpsychosis, right? The more implants that you put into your body, the further away, to your point, Zay, you get from a normal human, the more superhuman you become, the more you feel like you're apart from everyone else. And that lack of connection is what mentally causes you to go. And another thing I'd like to mention about cyber psychosis, again, with the visual language of Netrunners, is you see when somebody's starting to go through cyber psychosis, you start seeing these like eyes, these shadow eyes that appear all around their face, and they disappear and they're there a little bit. And you're just like, oh, cyber psychosis is coming for this guy. And I love that. Again, with
They also start having flashbacks to other parts. It happened with what was his name? Maine?
Yeah, Maine.
Got it right the first time. Oh God, I thought I was way off. But both David and Maine go through that same thing, right? Where they start blending the past with as they're I don't know, they're just having a psychotic break, I guess. They picture some, like, to me, that the main scene was interesting because you get to see him as this little scrawny kid just running through the desert, running away from his problems or something, or running was how he coped with his life or something. They don't make it 100% clear, but obviously there was like whatever he was flashing back to seemed to be like the point where he basically, that's probably the thing that caused him to, like, whatever he was running from or coping with is what caused him to go down this path as an edge runner, right?
Right. And I think
and he's just obsessed about being this big bulky dude who can take on anything.
Sure. And when it comes to David's character development, right, I think, when he really started going off the rails is when, again, spoiler alert, when he shoots the woman that it reminds him of his mother. It sort of reinforces this idea that I'm not what I once was. I've gone too far off the end. But even then, he
kills what he considers an innocent.
Yeah,
right?
Because he's killed everyone else. These gonks that it's just a part of the job. You've got to kill people that are opposing you. But he could have let this one go, but he was hallucinating and he saw her something else. And then that, it's like, again, when an addict does something truly horrible to somebody that they love, and they get sober enough to realize what they did. And then you feel like there's no redemption for you
it's called hitting rock bottom, right?
Yeah.
Some people, that's where you have to hit before you can recover your life.
Or sometimes, or just spiral further and, drink yourself.
As is the case with David. He makes decisions that spiral farther, but there's a logic and reason, right? He's willing to sacrifice himself because he never felt he was worth anything.
Well, and this is why I think David is so resistant to cyber psychosis in the first place, because David his character has always been about servicing the people that he loves, helping people that he loved achieve their dreams. First, it was his mom. She wanted him to be a corpo, and he didn't really want to be it, but he's like, okay, Mom, I see how much you're working for me. And then when he fell in love, I cannot remember her name, but when he fell in love, it was all about her dream of going to the moon. And that's finally actually how he burns out is, if everything else is ruined, at the very least, I can try to make her dream of going to the moon happen.
I can save her if no one else.
Right. And it's so tragic because he doesn't make it, but
no one does.
She gets to the moon. She gets to the moon, and it's just so bittersweet because she's there, but all she really wanted was to be there with him. Like, that's a great ending right there.
Yeah. It's definitely a traditional Japanese tragedy ending.
Yes, it is.
And I am not a big fan of tragedies, honestly. Tragedies are not I can do without, but I've watched quite a few. Curse of the Golden Flower, something like that.
Yes.
There's Grave of the Fireflies. That was a good one.
I know of Grave of the Fireflies. I think we've seen it, but it does not permeate my consciousness the same way.
That is sad.
Curse of the Golden Flower got me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Tragedies are a very valid art form, but they're not normally my thing. Now, that said, I think this is a good segue because I know you want to talk about tragedies, but I think there's something to set up first on the Cyberpunk universe in general that this ties into. And the whole thing, this is in Cyberpunk 2077. My understanding is it's part of the source material. That's where it came from. And in the anime, the RPG is about everyone is going to die. It is an incredibly deadly system. It's not about how you die. It's about how you cope with this shitty world that you're in. How do you define yourself, right? In 2027 or 2077, they talk about how, like, you don't get a drink as being one of these edge runners until you die. Then they name you, right? So
Right.
that's why there's this very fatalistic attitude for a lot of these people, because they're like, you don't make it until you die.
Right, and and not only do you have to die, but you have to be such a legend that you die in the middle of a suicidal operation that you don't even expect yourself to come out of. And this is the super highly stylized side, right? Which is fine, and it's good. But that whole sort of mentality, I see more from the 2020 was Cyberpunk 2020, at least the RPG, the tabletop RPG, was sort of where I see that, first coming from, right? The corporations are so obscenely powerful, and there's really nothing that you can do but fight, rage against the dying of the night, right? It's this sort of symbolic resistance that may not even necessarily be that effective. In fact, we see that theme throughout Cyberpunk. In 2077, Johnny Silverhand talks about how in 2020 he blew up Arasaka Tower. And what happened? They just became more powerful. Raish Bartmoss splintered the entire internet into these little, nodes that didn't communicate with each other. What happened? The corporations consolidated power once again. Like, there's no real way. I mean, this is pretty dark, but there's no real way to win against the corporations. It's basically the survival of the human spirit in regards to resisting this control. But because there's so much power consolidated by the corporations, it's sort of a feudal fight, but you don't want to stop doing it because this is a human spirit thing, right?
Yep. I like that about, and again, Shadowrun is my gateway into these dystopian futures as a kid. I never played Cyberpunk directly. Like, I've learned about Cyberpunk thanks to both Cyberpunk 2077 and Edgerunners, right? As modern media set in it. But Shadowrun is very inspired, right? It took that and said, but what if we had fantasy races and magic and did its own thing? But the themes are still there, right? Like, the corporations have as much power as the government, in many places even more so. You have Max Tack responding to things, and whatever their EMT service, the medical service in Trauma Team, that's right, which is its own pop circle of popularity. In Shadowrun, you've got Dockwagon, which does the same thing, right? And you have the police are their own megacorp, effectively. I mean, smaller scale, but they're like the response team, and like there's a lot of parallels between these two because it's obviously inspired by it. But that core methodology of you can't beat the corpse, but you can certainly keep working between them. But if you betray one to another, well, that's just business. You are technically a mercenary. There's less. I mean, you do that kind of in Cyberpunk 2077. That theme of like Shadowrunners are more mercenary than Edge Runners. Edge Runners tend to have one big patron, whereas Shadowrun you can kind of split between them.
Honestly, I would disagree with that. I think that it's expected that you're playing for a lot of different people as a merc. I don't really see a difference there personally, but yeah, I didn't play a whole lot of Shadowrun. I didn't like Shadowrun as much because it felt derivative, and like some nerd is like, oh, let's just take Cyberpunk and D&D and mix them together, and there's a new system. And yeah, I say that, and I played the Genesis Shadowrun game, the Sega Genesis Shadowrun game. That was awesome. That was really good. But I never really played a lot of tabletop RPG, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about here.
No, we're both just extrapolating based on experiences, right? I mean, maybe there's more culture. Like, again, I haven't read the Cyberpunk source material. It just feels to me from what I've consumed that it seems like you're closer to having the fixers seem to be more. They're sucking up to a particular people, so they're getting the scraps for plausible deniability. Of course, as with everything, you can make it whatever. I mean, I had one very short-lived Shadowrun game. We worked basically for a burger franchise. talk about low stakes, because that's definitely, I mean, they're a corporation, but they're not like working for Aztec or Arasaka in Cyberpunk. So I mean, like, you can make whatever you want from it. The reason I liked Shadowrun, one, no one in my group had an interest in playing Cyberpunk, and as we all know, the only way you get to play a system you really want to play is by having someone have the passion to run a game in that system, right?
Sure.
I love Shadowrun, but I don't have the passion to run a Shadowrun game.
Sure.
But I like the fantasy elements. One of my favorite classes in there is playing the physical adept. I've played kind of the John Woo two pistol, like, your magic powers, like, you just got crazy physical powers, right? You don't sling magic traditionally, but then they got shamans who, I played basically a street urchin for a while in one of the games too, which was really fun. Permanent street lifestyle, i.e. poor as fuck, just lives off the land. I can't remember what spirit he had, but he was just like, he went around, he had dreadlocks. Why? Because his hair was dirty, right? He had no cleanliness, but like, he was an effective asset to the team, but he's also like basically just a homeless bum, right? That was fun. There's so many things, concepts. I had built a character who was pretty much an AI, because they had rules for that in one of the things. We just never, that game never materialized, so I never got to play that concept. But being a permanent, like, I'm just this AI in the system. I have no body, I have no home, but I have 100 different things that I can inhabit at any time that I can flip between if I need to. He was a rigger, which is a Shadowrun term. Like, you.
No, I know that one. Yeah, it's
that's for any audience people who don't know this shit.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of Shadowrun, did you play any of the new Shadowrun games? They totally seem like your type of games. They're
fantastic. They're all fantastic.
And there's another one too.
I never finished the last one, which I think was Hong Kong. I should. I'm overdue to go back and replay those at some point.
Those were great. I really love those games.
I heard the ports weren't too great.
Okay.
I have them on GOG, so I could just break them out whenever, but
sure.
I have not.
But that was solid. Like, that was a great
story systems.
Yeah, I really like those games. I never played the tabletop RPG, but I played the Genesis game, and I played those computer games.
I really like the Super Nintendo game too. I was tangenting into a point here, I guess. Not so relevant for Cyberpunk, but Shadowrun has never been done fully for full justice. Later on they made a shooter out of it that I heard a lot of people enjoyed, but the grognard in me going, "What the fuck? This is not Shadowrun. Fuck you."
Sure.
But the Super Nintendo one, I'm basically, you can do everything, which defeats the whole essence thing, because if you get cyberware, that limits your max capacity with spell casting. But in the Super Nintendo one, you could do both.
Right.
The Sega Genesis one, I think, did a lot of things like doing reputation farming and some of the other things. It's been a long time since I played that game, but there's a lot of things I liked about the Sega Genesis one. I just don't think either of those two games captured the full experience of Shadowrun well. And
sure, and I wouldn't have known.
The Harebrained Schemes ones do a great service for Shadowrun.
Right, the newer games for PC.
But it's more of a narrative thing, and they're not long enough, in depth enough to truly give you the full feel, but they're great stories. So if you like dystopian futures, I highly recommend them.
Okay, that's good to know. So, in terms of other topics, we went over here Shadowrun for a bit, which was nice. We did Edgerunners. So, is there anything else we want to talk about for 2077? I know this has sort of been a lot of jumping around here. Not a whole lot of consistent talk about, but it is the RambleCast. So
I'd love to give Zaerah a chance, because I know we're going to lose her the farther we go away from Edgerunners specifically. So is there anything you would like to tack on, just talk about the overall Edgerunner experience, besides me nagging you endlessly to actually go watching it, and then thankfully you actually enjoying the final product when you did?
I think one of the things that kind of is sticking in my brain with regards to the whole the miniseries, as you could say, because I honestly don't think they can continue on with a storyline unless, yeah, spoilers.
Oh no, they'd have to do a completely different story.
Yeah, it's pretty much they would have to go into a different story. Is where do you think potentially would be a good pickup for a season 2? As far as within what we've seen now, if there's any particular characters that we saw in the very first season that you would like to see that may still be around, because there's one in particular that is still around, if I remember correctly.
I
Yes.
mean, you've got Adam Smasher, but I don't want to. I don't want an anime about the Mary Sue. Fuck him. And the rest of the main cast are all dead. Well, I mean, you didn't see the driver or the loli or them technically die, but I think it's pretty clear that they
Well,
definitely
Rebecca died. At
Yeah.
the end.
Oh, maybe she did. Oh, yeah, she got
She got
smushed.
by Adam
Yeah.
Smasher. Yes.
The last thing I remember is them like in the car and it driving off a cliff and exploding. But you're right. But that didn't. That part is all mixed in my head. The impression I got is they're all dead. So the only other people you could bring on would have to be some like, I don't know, maybe you do something with the Arasaka's son, and you do like a corpo piece. Like you could do that. Do some
piece would be great. But
I
I
mean,
was
but-
reading that they essentially did say that if they're going to do a season 2, it's going to be anthology style, all new characters, all
I think
new
that's the right play. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it would still be in Night City. I think you'll still get some. Maybe they'll bring the person back who did the voice of Wakako, and maybe they have more of an anthological, like she keeps giving out contracts to people, and maybe you do some like coherent narrative through multiple different edge running runs. So like every couple episodes is a new run with new people that keep furthering the overall story of the season. That could be
Yeah.
kind of interesting.
Could be
to
cool,
to go back to
potentially.
something you just said, actually, didn't Lucy survive?
Lucy survived.
Exactly.
She made it.
Oh
to the
right,
moon.
yes, you're right. You're right.
So yeah, that's the ultimate tragedy, is that she's enjoying her time on the moon, which was always her wish, but she doesn't have David with her, and he's.
But I
gone.
feel like her story's done. So the best you could do is have, in my opinion,
I
this is
agree.
just me. If you're going to have her involved in something, she's a cameo, or in like, because her life isn't. I mean, her life isn't over, but her story arc, as far as this is concerned, is. I think you do disservice to having her be a main focus.
Agreed.
But if, say, she's still having a vendetta versus Arasaka for some reason, so she keeps doing things, and then she shows up as in the process of people are doing something, and then she has her own mission, and they kind of butt heads. That could be the end of one group, right? Because she does something which screws them over. Then you have the nod to the first season, like, oh, well, she was in there doing this thing, and that triggers the alarm, and now you guys are fucked, and you get to see a little bit thing. You could have that be a subplot of her being there doing something else, and that how it interacts with the main cast, so to speak, of season 2. And that might be an interesting way to do it. Like, just she's still around, she's doing things, but I would much rather have it be mostly its own thing, if that makes sense. That's just me.
Yeah, I agree. It would be nice to have it be an anthology, different characters every season.
Right.
One thing that I would want to see the focus on is, the characters being as developed as they were. I think that for a sort of intellectual property like Cyberpunk, there's going to be a desire to just churn out a lot of action that isn't nearly as personal, I think, as Edgerunners was, and I worry about that happening. But I think it's just because Edgerunners set the bar so high, and much higher than I expected, which was great. But it's going to be
man,
difficult to top.
If they went Ghost in the Shell standalone complex on this thing, I would be in heaven. As much as I loved Ghost in the Shell as an anime,
Mhm.
the anime pales in comparison to standalone complex. The two standalone complex seasons, the original ones, are maybe my favorite animes of all time.
I never watched those. I'm just like, what? They're going to make something out of Ghost in the Shell, which was truly legendary. So I never saw them.
They are a billion times better than the actual.
Oh, come
anime.
on. 1 billion times better.
Yes.
That was a great
No.
movie.
it's a great movie, but it suffers from all of the problems that animes have, and that is it's in Edgerunners too, and that is you have lots of jump cuts, you lose a lot of background information. In standalone complex, it's an anime. You cannot not have your full attention on it the entire way through. It sets up backstory for like almost every single character that's part of that series. You learn more about all of them, how they came to be, and they have a subplot that goes through both seasons that if you blink, you miss vital information. And it's a fantastic ride the entire way.
All right, I'll watch it.
A billion
at
is
some point.
hyperbolic, but what I'm saying is,
No, of course it is.
if there was one anime series that I would tell people to watch, that's it.
Really, the one,
it is
top
the one. As much as I love, and now I get all the death threats from people if they do that. High School of the Dead is my favorite zombie mythos thing, but there's so much fan service in it that it detracts from the package, and you have to be mentally prepared. If they didn't have the fan service, it would be the most solid anime series I've ever seen. I don't have a complaint about Standalone Complex other than the only way to watch it is you have your full focus. You are attentive, you're not tired, not anything.
Sure.
Because if you blink, you will miss crucial stuff that is relevant throughout the entire two seasons. It's been a while since I saw it, but like I can't remember if we bought it or not. I'll have to go. I bought it with the intent of showing it because I saw it separate from Zae. And I'm like, we got to do this. But it's the thing you commit to. And it's 2 seasons of full-length anime. So it is a long undertaking. It's not something you just watch an episode and then you don't watch it for a while. You need to you don't have to quite binge it, but like, you watch 2-3 episodes. Next night, you watch another couple episodes. You don't put time off because then you will miss some of the stuff. But
that's interesting. Like, I'll have to check it out.
Everything in there is just there's so many great pieces, and like I'm sorry, the themes of the original Ghost in the Shell anime that fail completely in the follow-up. Like I watched the second Ghost in the Shell. It's okay, but it's not the same thing. It's not as good. I was skeptical about Standalone Complex, but then I watched it and I went, holy shit, this is what I wanted from Ghost in the Shell all along. And you get the taste of it in that anime, but it's only a 2.5 hour or hour and a half, whatever the runtime is, right? You get 2 seasons of just stellar stuff. Also, it can be a little slow at times. Like it's not action all the time. There's action scenes, but it explores so much of that world they set up in the anime. Like I could go on, but this is not the Ghost in the Shell anime podcast. No, I highly recommend it. Like if you've not seen Standalone Complex and all of this dystopian future and delving into what is the nature of reality, what is AI, Standalone Complex has you covered, and it's fucking amazing.
And he's mainly saying that about Standalone Complex because of the fact that he wanted me to watch it. And there's a lot of things that I can do at the same time as watching the TV. I lost complete track of the plot, the background information of characters, and everything. And
that was like after an episode and a half.
My ex-wife used to multitask while watching TV, and honestly, it drove me crazy. So.
Well, I could do it for most things.
Sure.
But it is so detailed and has so much information it can toss at you that I kind of looked at him and I went, I can't. I am not fully committed to watching this and taking it in. I pretty much have lost this whole time that we've been sitting here and watching it.
And those little, like I said, those little things are important because they set up and they continue to compound, and like it's just this evolving narrative. And sure, I'm sure there are some throwaway scenes. It's been a while since I watched it, but what I'm saying is that they do such a good job of continuing to lay more and more groundwork for what's going to come later, and things that you feel like aren't too necessary at the time are setting up for pretty good payoffs later. Now, it may not be the most unpredictable. I'm sure some people called some of the things that are going on just fine. I'm not saying it's an amazing mystery, right? What I'm saying is it's an amazing narrative that doesn't have a lot of downtime, and if you blink, you miss it. And if you blink, you miss it, you very easily can get compounding more and more confused as time goes on. And either you shrug it off and you continue, and then you lose something from the viewing, or you just pay attention. And I think if you pay attention, you will be very well rewarded, and it is a better experience. And if you don't do that, I think it's a lesser experience, and you won't come away with the same impressions as I did from my like 2-week binge run of watching it, if that makes sense, right?
Okay, that makes sense.
Others may not hold it on the same pedestal as I do, but I do know it's pretty universally reviewed well. Maybe not as well as I am, but again, if this is your jam and dystopian futures are mine, this may be the best media product I've ever seen in this genre.
In this genre. So that's your qualification. It's not your favorite anime in general, but in the dystopian future.
Well, I mean, like, when we do everything, like, again, High School of the Dead is a very different thing. It's my favorite zombie. It may be my favorite zombie product ever made, but the fan service, I can't just blindly recommend House of the Dead or High School of the Dead to people, because the fan service will make them say, you are a creeper. I like it despite the freaking fan service. I wish they didn't have it, because it would be a better product without it. But I'm not the one who created it, so what am I going to do?
Sure.
But it's the best look at, a bunch of people and how these broken people are very functional in a dysfunctional world. Like, their dysfunctions set them up. Welcome to Edgerunners and Cyberpunk and all these, right? Like, dysfunctional people are better suited to surviving these things than a pure, like, I wouldn't survive in the Edge Runner world. I would say this is bullshit, and I'm immediately shot by someone, right? That's it.
So now that you've gone back to Cyberpunk, real quick question as far as somebody who hasn't played the game, trying to get us back on the topic at hand. Do you believe that the outrage that happened over the game, and because I know both of you had a very different experience when playing Cyberpunk 2077, do you believe that the outrage that happened by other users over the game, whether they were playing on PC or consoles, was justified?
Do you want to go first? Do you want me to?
I can go first. So here's the thing. If you're releasing a game on multiple platforms, the game should work out of the box on multiple platforms. I think the rage was quite justified. For the people that didn't have higher end PCs like Tath and I had when we played it. Not to say that we didn't run into bugs, we did, but they were not nearly, they weren't game ending bugs. They weren't, unable to complete main quest bugs. They weren't constant crashes. Mostly they were more humorous than anything else, at least my case. So I can understand the rage, certainly. I think it sort of created this phenomenon in the gaming world where people are afraid to get cyberpunked. If you hype your game too much and you're not able to deliver bug-wise, now it's been fixed enough to where that's less of an issue. But even now that I've replayed it, there are a lot of bugs, even now, 2 years after release, that have had me yelling at my computer.
They're showstoppers anymore.
They're not showstoppers. I can get around them, but they are extremely frustrating still. And they're more frustrating than they were the first go around. But I think that's because I knew, I braced myself for horrible bugs the first time, because that's what I heard. And so I think it was just a shifting mentality. I expected all those to be fixed now. They're not fixed now. So yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
So to tack on to what you said, if you had a console and you bought this game, I'm sorry. Unacceptable.
Agreed.
Everything that PlayStation did, and being delisted and everything, all of that is justified. All of the outrage, even the hyperbolic parts of it, are deserved, because they hyped their game up too much. They didn't deliver. That said, I think it was the best dystopian, futuristic open world we've seen today. It may be one of the best open worlds created to date, despite the fact that it's so flawed. And let's go through some key bugs that I think I suffered through. The Grand Theft Auto police system absolutely busted at launch.
Horrible.
The economy is busted and broken, and I still don't think they fixed that. I'm sure there's a mod. I haven't explored mods. Unacceptable. The economy in that game, if you're not one of the technomancer type people who can hack all the things, there is not enough money presented to you in that game. Disgustingly under, because of how much all the cars cost, or cost then. Again, referring to launch, I have no idea what it's like now. You're playing, you might, but like you would say you'd make like 500,000 total for a run, and a car, one of the cool cars that you could buy was 245,000. So not buying any other gear, half of your total budget of a character playing through that game. And I mean, going through all of the side quests, you might be lucky to make 500,000. I could be
Better
wrong
than that.
but I mean, it was unconsciously broken. And I thought they had done some adjustments, but I still don't think that they've really done the overhaul there. Crafting, the fact that there's no craft all button or craft X number of buttons, you had to break everything down individually. I can't imagine wanting to play a grenade build in that with how having to craft all that. That would make me want to shoot myself. Like, there are so many things that at launch were still underbaked, so obviously broken and needed fixing. And they didn't have time to fix those things because you had cars that were flying into the air and exploding just by spawning in. Like, I mean, there were so many massive bugs that these little quality of life things that should have obviously been fixed are on the radar, but they're not addressed. And they may not even be fully addressed now because they've had so much bug fix and things to address before they could even get to those things. That said, other than what I complained about the economy and the crafting, I didn't care about the GTA system because I didn't play it that way in either of my playthroughs. Because I played it twice right around launch, and I'm waiting for the Edgerunners DLC to come out next year before I play it a third time. I enjoyed what I played, and I know you didn't really play. You kind of did a more streamlined thing where like you played until you started getting a little iffy, and then you focused on the main story and you finished it. I
learned that lesson from Skyrim to where I don't think I ever even beat the main quest of Skyrim because
there's no point because there's no story. I mean, the fun of Skyrim is adventuring and wandering around. But to that point, I didn't finish all the stuff in my first playthrough. My second playthrough, I played the Technomancer, which we've talked about before. I played the Contagion build effectively. I mean, full Technomancer. Like my first 10 hours of Cyberpunk with my second playthrough. My first playthrough was a tech sniper build, so I could shoot people through walls. So in the first 10 hours of my Technomancer playthrough was like the first 2-3 hours of my tech sniper because it was so much harder of a start.
It is.
But once I got that certain number of power points, the next 10-15 hours of playing of my tech sniper, I did in like 3-4 hours. I literally finished every quest I came across other than the final boxing match quest in that game. The only other quest I think I might have missed, and I'm not sure if it's a quest, but you do this one thing, and then you're supposed to have a Johnny Silverhand interaction show up, and I never got that, and that prevented me from doing the secret ending Johnny Silverhand thing. I'm pretty sure for the second playthrough, where I was going to, as I understand it, you play as him, and it's a very different story. I don't know what it is because I looked through things, and I look back, I'm like, okay, you do this mission, and then this is supposed to pop up, and that never happened for me. So there was technically a game breaking bug for me that prevented me from doing the secret ending. Maybe the guides are better written, and can better lay that out the next time I want to do that secret ending. Do you need to do those? No, but I was fine with my second ending. It was it was better than ending up on the satellite, or on the space station. The space station ending was very depressing.
I think my ending, as I only played once, I'm playing a second time now, was to run away as a nomad with Pan Am. That was my ending.
That's why I did the second one. But you live in that ending, unless there's multiple parts to that ending.
Yeah,
That's kind of, I
definitely-
find that to be a more canonical ending. I won't say anything more about the space station. Just know that if you go to the space station, I found it pretty depressing. It was not a very satisfying ending. And I won't say anything more than that. You'll know if you get it or not.
Well, we'll see. I'll be interested to see. Although this time I decided to play a female V so that I could hook up with Judy because I like Judy a lot, but couldn't
Judy's
hook up
cool.
with her as a dude. So
No, you cannot. I did that in my first playthrough.
sure.
And then I played a dude the second time, and all their talks about inclusivity and whatnot. I kind of do I mean, I understand that sometimes you can get a stronger story, but I would prefer you be able to romance people with whoever, and it just, especially in a setting like Cyberpunk where the flesh is a transitory thing. It just feels
I
like
disagree because it feels more realistic. Like most people are not bisexual. Most people
I'm
have
not saying they are. I'm
strong
saying
preference for
what I'm
female
saying
or
is
male.
a story of you could have the strong preference. What I'm saying is it's when you have two people that just click. It could be a natural thing, and in Cyberpunk specifically because of the dystopian future, and like I said, the body is so malleable. It makes more sense for those characters to be like that than it does in, say, Dragon Age. Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure.
So I found it more suspender breaking that they decided to go that route in that game, because based on the source material, I fully expected that you make people who are available for romance, and if you do the right things, it doesn't matter what you are, because it's the personality behind the sex that matters more. That's what I would expect in a Cyberpunk game, and they didn't do that. That's all.
Sure.
Whereas I don't expect that necessarily in Dragon Age, other than BioWare was kind of progressive earlier than other people.
You're
I'm not
talking
saying
about cultural changes that are influencing sort of a more fluidity when it comes to sexuality, right?
Yeah, and it's becoming more and more acceptable. And the Cyberpunk universe, it makes more sense.
Okay, that's a
BioWare
fair
did it
point.
because it's BioWare, and they were, a kind of a very progressive culture at that point. So they did it, whether it made sense or not.
It's a fair point. I still disagree only because sexuality is such a weird thing that none of us really have any control. I mean, you have no idea over who you're attracted to, and sometimes it's very strong in one way, sometimes it's more loose. But you have a good point in terms of the culture being different enough in that particular setting to where it may be more malleable. But
all your points are why I think it should be. They should have done that in this game, and it made me more feel like I understand why you have the stance you do. But my takeaway was the Polish studio who creates this, aka CD Projekt Red, is more uptight.
You're right.
And it came off to me as you're showing that you're uptight because you didn't include this by absolutely hard setting it that way in this setting. This is the setting that would make sense.
Yeah.
If you didn't want both of those, if you wanted those two to be canonical for a particular male or female V, then there should have been a third character that was just as important that you could do that too. That's just me. Because like I said, this universe is the one that makes sense to be in. This is an artistic decision that I feel like shows something about their mentality more than anything. And I shouldn't be attributing that. It doesn't make me mad, but I think it's worth noting that it seems obvious that this speaks more to their company's mindset versus and viewpoint as a culture versus anything else.
More socially conservative.
I'm not demanding for woke culture in everything everywhere or in anywhere, period. I'm just saying from a source material universe you're talking about with all of the things they have, it shocked me that this did not exist in the game. And it was talked about a little bit. I'm not saying I got a pitchfork for it, but I think it's worthwhile mentioning.
It is worth mentioning. I still see Cyberpunk 2077 as far more retro-futuristic than like modern futuristic. Like all of the cars, for example, have actual engines and not batteries. They're not all electric. There's a lot of things like that. So I guess I saw it more as an artifact of this weird 80s retro-futurism than that. But given your perspective on it. That's an interesting perspective. I appreciate you bringing it to the table.
The counterpoint I'd say to that, because I think that's a fair counter argument. The reason I would say the counterpoint to that, which leads me back to why I still fall on this side of the fence, is it's not the original Cyberpunk. This is Cyberpunk 2077. They decided to make a more futuristic one that is further ahead. Things have changed and is now obviously designed by people who are not in the 80s anymore. Does that make sense?
Yes, but
so
it
was
still
designed
2020 like. There are some differences in the themes.
Things have changed, right? Like
But
they have, because they, I mean, some things have changed and some things have stayed the same despite the changes. So blowing up of Arasaka Tower and the fallout of that, which is obviously a key, and how that's reinforced the thing. Like all of those little things that they've added to post the end of 2020, right, to make their own new setting. What I'm saying is they've made their own setting. It's still influenced. It's still cyberpunk. It was still made with the original author's consent, but it's still made by people who are no longer in the 80s when it's designed. So they're in a new universe, or they're a universe that has progressed and has different values and has changed over time. Do you see what I'm saying? So like,
I see what you're saying.
They're not in the same mindset as a person who, as if they were literally still in the 80s. They might be in. They might still be trying to. I know I'm not doing a great job of fully explaining it, but
I know exactly what you're saying, and it makes sense to me. This is one of those minor quibbles that I have about the Cyberpunk universe. I guess that's worth mentioning. Is there are some definitely thematic changes in terms of 2020 to 2020 or 2077, in that basically everything's quite a bit less free in terms of not corporate control, but just this sort of cultural stranglehold. I'm not really explaining this very well, but as a counter, to that, everything else is nearly identical to 2020, and I think that's done intentionally because you look at all the slang. The slang is identical to 2020. I don't think I've seen any new slang. You don't think that slang would change in 50 years? There's a lot of things.
Well, they use the same slang because they're trying to evoke the original thing.
To the original, but
how about this? The original source material and Shadowrun, more or less, your corporations are these Machiavellian entities because reason. Whereas, because this whole conversation is paralleling, let's be fair, we are seeing the beginnings of a cyberpunk dystopian future potential outcome in our own actual world setting. Many things that were predicted in Cyberpunk are coming to pass. However, we do not have the megacorps literally being more powerful than the government, as in they own land, like in Shadowrun, or there's no Microsoft tower from which they have their 15 fleets of mercenary corps. They just go out into the city and just do whatever they want, right? That doesn't exist. Microsoft has a corporate head office, but they're not quite to that point, right? But in 2077, you still get the differences between the original 2020 mythos and some permeation of our actual world bleeding in and tempering and changing some of how that is all designed. They're still Machiavellian entities, but maybe blunted with some of the realism of the real world, I think. That makes sense?
Yeah, I see what you mean there. But yeah, it's just one of those things that's really not that different from 2020, 2077, not that different from 2020, except for these sort of minor changes that relate to the changes, that are happening in society now relative to the 80s, although they're fairly minor.
Was AI a big thing in the original 2020? Was there a Delamain thing? Was he a thing?
There was AI, yes. AAGI, that existed. For sure. The internet, I think that's also one of the reasons why Raish Bart Moss broke the internet in 2077, because the net running was quite a bit different.
There's a lot of allusions to that in 2077 about because one of the key points is you go into the dark web, right? And you find one of those AIs that's still trapped on the other side.
I mean, not only that. You're right, but not only that, but the fact that they broke the internet into a bunch of different shards in an attempt to quell corporate power, but that just increased corporate power because now they're the lord and master of all these small shards. Sort of reflects how corporatized the internet has become, because when Cyberpunk 2020 was a thing, it was an absolute Wild West, and it was not controlled by corporations. It was all, they talk about BBSs in 2020, which used to be a thing, and they were independent. There weren't just these 5 thoroughfares of information that we all went to, all corporate controlled, that directed us into these paid for pages. You used to be able to Google, and you would, for something very specific and obscure, and you would find some dude's page that's, he's had 10 hits ever, but man, he this one particular topic, he's got all these crazy takes on it and interesting stuff, and it's very hard to find those types of things anymore. Usually all that conversation just moves to Reddit or Twitter or whatever.
So the destruction of the old internet, that is a construct they made as a foundation for 2077.
I mean, correct? I see it as being
I'm just saying, like, story-wise, was that part of 2020 at all? Or is that literally something that narratively they put in the background between 2020 and 2077?
2020 was, you were a netrunner, you got to go anywhere on the internet, from one location, and, you went to your buddy's BBS, and it is very much cyberpunk like, except for, in cyberspace, you would fight these sort of, you imagined you were fighting these sort of 80s CGI, geometric entities with, Tron discs and all this stuff. Like, there's none of that in 2077. In fact, one of the things that I'm disappointed in 2077 is every time you try to hack something, every time you try to do something, internet wise, you have that stupid singular one mini game where you have to match the hexadecimal, characters and, fill up the bar, like Mastermind or one of those games. And, that is not at all what I remember from Cyberpunk. It was much better, I feel like.
Shadowrun as a system does it better, although mechanically it's painful. You always want a hacker on your team, but because of how it's designed, the lore is amazing. The mechanics when playing tabletop was atrocious. My understanding is they've addressed this and made it a little better in more recent ones. So basically, it has that same shards kind of concept, right? So that every megacorp owns their own little domain, right? But when you go into it, any sufficiently advanced corporation or entity has their own theming to it. So the very Japanese companies, one of them might have it be like a feudal Japan thing where everything is in that motif. But your Shadowrunner could be like I don't know, could look like a character from Rick and Morty. And you stick out like a sore thumb unless you can mask yourself. And in the fact that because you don't adhere to the theme of the local domain, I can't remember the right terminology, like you actually have penalties trying to interact in that area.
Oh, sure.
Whereas you could also be like, your Shadowrunner could be his icon, like his persona on the thing could actually be like a samurai, and you might actually fit in better and you actually can pass through there. But then you go to, like, I don't know, some like super American Wild West arms company, right? And you go there, waltzing around in your like cool samurai armor. Everyone's in like dusters with pistols, and the ice is like, "Who the fuck are you? I'm taking you out immediately," right?
Sure, that makes sense.
Lore-wise, I think they do it better there, is all I'm saying. Mechanically,
none of those elements are sort of relevant at all in modern cyberpunk. And you do see it a little bit, as I recall, in the newer Shadowrun games.
It's probably for the better because, like, if someone goes on a journey, it's like there's so many dice rolls, like all their mechanics. It's just, it slows down everyone else. But I believe they also added an actual technomancer as besides just the hacker type character. I can't remember the name. Who would basically, like, they could just, like, they wave their hand and they affect things. So they didn't necessarily have to go in and, like, they made a couple of rolls, but they could be doing that on the side to see if they broke into something or hacked someone's cyber eyes or whatever, which is probably closer to how Cyberpunk 2022 and Cyberpunk Red probably handled it, the hacking. Which is,
I don't know anything about Red. I'd like to play it at some point, but yeah, it's, I guess halfway point between 2020 and 2077. So I'd be curious, culturally speaking, sort of how it is, and what variants the themes have between 77 and Red. But I don't know anything about it, so I can't intelligently discuss it at all.
yeah.
So
We're extrapolating. Like I said, I don't know anything about the Cyberpunk universe other than the little bits I've pulled together because of Edgerunners and playing 2077. But I never played those systems. Shadowrun's my baby, even though it's a terrible system.
sure. So we're okay. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I do have, since I'm not familiar with too much, with the exception of Ed Runners and also listening to you talk, but this is more really on future speak and more geared towards the company, especially since the company recently announced that they're working on a Project Orion, which is going to be codenamed Orion, which will be in the Cyberpunk franchise. And this was, I think, announced a couple of months ago, maybe in October. And also, they are also planning to be releasing in 2023, as I'm reading here, the potentially last expansion, because I do remember them saying that it was going to be the last expansion for Cyberpunk 2077, which is Phantom Liberty, which is going to be released sometime in 2023.
Right.
With regards to the last expansion, is there anything in particular that you would like to see as far as technically any fixes or changes that they may be able to potentially do to 2077 to be able to improve it? And as far as story-wise, things that you believe that they may be able to expand upon. And also the second part with regarding to the new project, and I can repeat if you guys forget, is there something that you would like to see as far as in codename Orion? Any changes as far as technically the project itself, to set it apart from 2077? Any issues that you may have seen in 2077 that you would like to have potentially fixed? Any particular story-wise? Because from what is being described to me, because I have not played the game 2077 and the Cyberpunk Universe and Night City, it's almost like one of these stories akin to Dark City, that pretty much the city itself is almost like a character.
Sure.
Yeah.
So is there any particular type of storyline that you would like to see them expand upon in the new project? And do you believe, and this is the third question on this, and do you believe if, when it comes to CD Projekt Red, if they continue on the path that they went on with 2077 and having really a bungle of a release, do you think it would be the proverbial nail in the coffin situation? Because they've lost a lot of good faith with their customer base.
Jaedaen, can I go first? I promise to keep it really quick.
Go for it.
So to tackle these in a random order, but for a few things. One, of note, there's not just they announced not just Orion, but like 3 or 4 different games in the Cyberpunk universe and other things that they're all doing in tandem. One of them being outsourced. There's a lot of concern there to your last point. They may be tackling too much. I think they may, on tying into, I think, points 1 and 3, or questions 1 and 3, I think they're doing the right thing by calling Cyberpunk 2077 done and not doing the full Witcher 3 thing with it, because it's a poison pill. It has too much bad reputation. They've improved it a lot. It's much closer to what they had originally intended, but it's still super overhyped and missing a ton of things. It'll never be the redemption story that Hello Games got with what was the name of their game?
No Man's Sky.
No Man's Sky. Yeah, they'll never redeem themselves to that level. Edgerunners helped a little bit, but ultimately, as much as it makes me personally sad, I think the right call is to finish up 2077, take the bones, make a better game, actually scope creep it appropriately so it doesn't. I stop scope creep, don't hype it up as much, and just focus on making a good fucking game with good DLC like you did with Witcher 3. Witcher 3 also had a really bad launch, which people forget. I thankfully missed that piece of it. I just played it later. But Witcher 3 is a darling to the community. Cyberpunk 27 will always have a mixed reputation. To your last, or I think it was your first point, but the last one I'll address, what I'd love them to do in 27, actually add content to Pacifica. It's there. It's a barren mess of virtually nothing. Whatever they add, if they can add it in there so there's actually something that happens in that place, would justify its existence and not just be a giant waste of space on the map. And now I'll turn it to you, Jaedaen.
Sure. Well, those are all some good points. For me, it would be nice, minor things. Again, just switch out the mini game with something far more interesting because you're going to be using it a lot. There's one mini game, and it's not that great. For another point, like in comparison for Edgerunners to 2077, Edgerunners had a far superior story. The story is not that great in 2020. It's not bad, but it's not
2077.
2077. I'm sorry, 2077 exactly. It's not bad. It's not terrible. But it's really not that great and compelling either. I thought Keanu Reeves did a good job as Johnny.
I think that's because there's not enough of it. There's only maybe 8 main story missions or whatever.
I mean,
Jackie at the beginning does a fantastic job, but he's not there long enough to truly hold it. And it's obviously you just don't get enough time of the full.
We don't get invested as much with him.
Yeah.
Because we don't have as much time to spend with him, right? But beyond that, like you can still tell a good story in that short amount of a time. And there was a lot of ludonarrative dissonance that I didn't like. For example, oh yeah, we're dying. We're about ready to die. Oh, but let's make sure to do all the 5,000 side quests. And it's like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Oh, I'm only having relic malfunction anytime I do a main mission. So
can I
maybe focus on ludonarrative dissonance? That's would be helpful. That is something that bothers me a lot.
Hey, Jaedaen, just to tack onto that, I think this is worth noting. So there is a very notable reviewer who works for one of the big outlets. I can't remember what his name's. Gene something or other. He was recently diagnosed with cancer. He talked about this and Cyberpunk 2077 specifically because on a ACG on a podcast a little while ago, and just I agree with you on what you're saying, but just so you can have something to consider on the other side, he absolutely loves this game because of the fact that the main character's dying. He's coping with his own mortality personally right now. And he loved the capability where he could basically just go, okay, I'm in here. Oh my God, I have this thing. And now I can fuck off and do whatever I want and never address that. So for him, the setup of this, it just strikes that chord because of what he's dealing with personally. I'm still on the same side as you. I'm just saying there's a viewpoint for someone else that I got to listen to the story of him talk about this. I figured it was worthwhile pointing out to your thing there. And I apologize for derailing, but
it sounds
this is the right place to talk about it.
Sounds like an interesting, story. I'd be interested to hear that for sure, right? Because when you have cancer or dealing with something fatal, right, everybody deals with it in a very different way because it's such a looming trauma. And
it just completely changed the way he looked at the game. And I thought that was an interesting thing because story-wise, I'm on the same viewpoint as you, but this thing spoke to him in a much different way that it doesn't speak to either of us.
Right. Well, sure.
And of course, most people aren't going through that. So I think more people are probably going to complain on the side we are than he is. But
sure. And great. That sounds good. There were a lot of sort of minor examples of that. Of course, when you make a game that's as complex as 2077, you are going to have weird issues like that. or you complete the quest and oh yeah, Johnny and I are on good terms, but then in this next quest we act like we hate each other. But that's because I'm completing it in an order that the game didn't expect, or whatever like that. So things like that. But these are, I guess, quibbles in regards to it's a very massive game. It's a very complex game. It's going to be very, very hard to nail all of that stuff. Honestly, I wouldn't mind if the scope was a little bit even smaller so that it could be more of a focused game.
That's my number one complaint about every single Bethesda game ever for both their Fallout and Elder Scrolls, which we'll talk later on a different podcast when we complain and talk about Bethesda.
So I know that you guys mentioned briefly Johnny Silverhand, and of course, not knowing the universe, I must keep on saying that just because of the fact that I get my information from listening to them talk and also from Edgerunners. But as somebody looking from the outside in,
of course,
do you think that having Keanu Reeves come in and play Johnny Silverhand was... I hate using the word malicious. Let's go for deceptive intent of CD Projekt Red of trying to use a big name to hype up their product, knowing that there was lacking content for that particular character background based upon what you guys have stated.
I think it absolutely was a smokescreen to hide from the problems they were having. I'll let Jaedaen talk further, and we'll go from there.
I just believe that that's just sort of something that most large projects do, right? Why are there so many audiobooks that are narrated by non-professional celebrity actors, and they narrate it like crap when you could just get a real voice actor to do it? It's the kind of thing that drives me crazy. Having said that,
name to draw attention.
Having said that, in this particular case, I think it worked out really well. I think he did a good job with the narration. I think he sort of embodied the character quite well. But, was it an attempt to, bring star power to get public eyes on the game? Of course it was. No question about it. Yeah.
I'm on the same page as you. I think he did a fantastic job with the character. I think he did a great job. I feel like I've seen an interview, which, of course, hype material, or, PR material, so whatever, but it seems like, I don't know if he came to them, they went to him, or whatever. It seems like there was a really good working relationship, at least that they went through, but it doesn't take away. This was definitely a smokescreen PR stunt. You get a big name to pull it to it. Doesn't matter whether they liked it or they did a good job. It was still a smokescreen to hide from a lot of the flaws. They threw more money at it in a small way, which only made it hyped even more, at the detriment to other things. They could have had a no-name person or lesser costing person do this role and spent that money and time and effort on other things, making the game better. They could have done that.
I agree.
And please don't get me wrong, anybody who's listening to this, I love Keanu Reeves. I've loved many of the movies he's in, but based upon the things I've seen happening through this game and with the fallout of the issues happening through this game and the discussions that have happened, to me it seemed almost like, okay, let's bring in Keanu, we've got a role and everything that he can act in, and people will go crazy and may make up for other places that the game may be not so good at.
I mean, yeah, when he's on screen, he does a fantastic job. He brings a level of awesome to the story that they put together. Unfortunately, it needed a lot more story. It needed a lot more connective tissue, which does not exist because of time and all the problems they had.
Right. It'll be interesting to see where they go from here, because they know that they've really got to get it right this time.
I think they have every chance to do that. I mean, I haven't written CD Projekt Red off completely, but they've definitely damaged their consumer goodwill. Like, I wouldn't buy one of their games on sight unseen. I need reviews to come out, multiple of them before that I trust before I would dive into their next thing. Like I won't pre-order or anything, Not that I pre-ordered 2077. You played it before me, actually, your first playthrough. I played it like 1 or 2 weeks after you, but you played it a little bit after launch, but it's still within launch period, right? We both played it that December. You played it earlier than me, though, as I recall, or January. I think it was December. I think I played it while I was on vacation.
Pretty soon after it came out, I feel like I played it.
Yeah. And then I played it like a week and a half later. And then played through it twice while on vacation.
Yes, I remember that. You were on vacation. I really, really remember liking the way that the city layout was and the atmosphere. They did a really good job with a lot of things.
I told you, it may be my favorite open world that's ever been made, even though there's a lot of flaws with it, right?
Sure. I agree. I've got
felt like a real city, even though
200 hours on it, and that is a lot for me, as you well know, right? I'm not a guy that has a good attention span when it comes to games.
Yeah, you play a game for like 15 hours if you're lucky.
If I'm lucky, yes. But
there's
that's saying a lot.
But both Cyberpunk 2077 and Crusader Kings buck that mold for you.
Yeah, well, there are others as well. I've got like almost 300 hours on Cultist Simulator too. I love that game.
I just listed the 2 off the top of my head. I do.
But yeah, you're right. There's a handful. There's probably not more than, I would say, 5 or 6 where I have that. And I get bored with the same kind of style of game very quickly as well. So I'm always looking for novelty. So yeah, it's a big endorsement for me to have that experience with.
You don't handle the grind or lengthy games. You like to move between things, which I get. As opposed to me, I'll play anything Final Fantasy Tactics, like quick plug, Tactics Ogre Reborn. A lot of people, there's a mixed reception because it truly is the Dark Souls of tactics games. I just beat it last night, and Zay looked over at me in bed as I just closed my eyes and was just trying not to rage and throw the laptop across the room after 2 attempts at the final boss. And then I beat it on the 3rd.
Oh god! Shoot me in the head having to deal with that.
You do not want to do this. Like, it's not like it angers me. It really does. And I just reevaluated, did things slightly different, and I did better. But the game is amazing, and I will probably have 700 hours by the time I'm done with it. Maybe not all in a row. I'm looking. I already have like over 100 hours in this game, and it's going to keep going. Anyway,
yep.
Continue on. This
there
is
we
not
go.
Tactics Ogre Reborn podcast.
So I can't think of much else now. I probably the worst job ever in trying to keep things on track because that was the rambliest RambleCast I think we've had. But
touched on Genesis Shadowrun briefly.
Briefly.
We didn't really talk any further. Do you want to? Is there anything else you think you would want to talk about on that subject, or do you think just saying yes, it existed and I liked it is good enough? Because that's pretty much what people said.
Really, for me, it was almost all atmosphere for that game. I liked that it was sort of real time, which was nice. I liked, for a Genesis game, there was a fair amount of customization in your character. For a Genesis action sort of based game, I liked how the view was a little bit closer, to the ground. You can see your character a little bit better than the Super Nintendo version. The sort of going to the Native American sacred land or whatever was kind of different. Like, you don't get that out of anything Cyberpunk. The sort of the connection to nature and that whole thing. So that was interesting and different.
I think it did factions well because I remember you could work for like the Yakuza and then you get special equipment.
That's true
for them and other things.
Yeah,
I think it did the Matrix worse. And I could be misremembering, but I thought the Matrix was better in the Super Nintendo, but I haven't played either of them. So I might be wrong. I might be flipping that. But I think I liked the Matrix better in Super Nintendo. And if I'm misremembering, someone will eventually go, no, dude, this, and I'll go, oh, okay, I'm wrong. But that's what I vaguely remember at this moment, having not played either of those in like the last 10 years. I played a crap out of the Sega Genesis one, but I never went back to it again after I played it that time. I've gone back and emulated the Shadow or the original Super Nintendo one at some point. And it's not a true Shadowrun game because you break all the rules because basically you're every class, right? So I think from like you played a role better in the Sega Genesis one, and that's all I remember about them. They were both flawed games that I enjoyed because they were Shadowrun and they did different elements. And if they were merged together, I think they would have made one amazing game. And that's all I can remember from this at this point.
Sure. I like the music of the Genesis game quite a bit. I can still remember it. I have a strange sort of eidetic memory when it comes to old computer game and video game music. Like I can still hear it in my head right now. I probably haven't played it for 20
If
plus
someone
years.
played it for me, I'd probably remember, but I think it's just part of your music nerdism, right? Like you
Yeah,
just have a head for like musics, and that's part of how you remember a thing. Whereas unfortunately, like some things I'm playing with one earbud in, or I've muted the sound completely, and I'm just playing the game. And if I told that to Carrick from ACG, not that he knows who I am, he'd be like, "You're a heretic," because like sound, music, and voice are like integral to him, and I'm sure to you too.
I
But
agree.
it just depends on the game. Like I do enjoy like. I think Nier Automata wouldn't be nearly the game without the music score playing in the background of it. But at the same time, real life happens, you know?
Well, sure. At the same time, there's a lot of games that are good, but the music sucks. It's just terrible. And
Or it's just
in that
middling.
case,
You don't
in
care.
that case, I will mute it and I will think about, okay, what are some of the YouTube albums or compilations or whatever that I could put on that would fit this atmosphere very well. And then it's 1,000 times better. But that's the exception rather than the rule. Usually the music is not so bad that I turn it off. Usually.
Yeah. Well, because, I mean, most things these days pay attention to it or they use it in a certain way. But the reality is, I mean, like 7 Days to Die could have the best music ever. I love 7 Days to Die, but ultimately, I've played that game the way it is. I'd rather have something on in the background while I'm playing that. Any game that I'm playing, kind of like one of those comfy co-op games, the music doesn't matter as much to me. It gets replaced with whatever I'm listening to, podcast or whatever, or to your point, my own music that I pull up somewhere. Just because the game is the action and the gameplay. It's not the music for me at that point.
Sure, I get that. It is definitely. I do agree with the whole experience. I mean, you look at movies. You watch a movie that doesn't have the soundtrack behind it. For all of these subconscious cues, it's a much different experience. So I understand that, and I agree with that. But sometimes the music's just off the mark, whereas the game is really good. Although usually, if the music is bad, the rest of the game is bad, and I don't care one way or the other. But that it doesn't always happen that way. So. All right. Well, I am pretty rambled out myself. I don't know if there's anything else anyone wants to bring up in regards to any of these tangentially related topics to Cyberpunk, but I'm all ears.
I think we did a good job of rambling in and out of the points that we wanted to talk about. We didn't necessarily stay to a strict, like, we're only talking Edgerunners. We're only talking Cyberpunk, now 2077. But I think we covered it.
Sure. Well, you can look at your Google Analytics to see how popular that. Not that we're necessarily doing this for anyone else anyway, right? But
Honestly, the business nerd in me really looks forward to seeing how this goes, and I'm waiting for us to get our first comment somewhere, somehow. I'm sure it'll be from a 13-year-old somewhere who listened to 1 minute and then says something offensive. But
this
whatever.
sucks. No, I mean that's the first comment I got on one of my musics. Was some little kid.
But at least then you've made it, and then you just go, "Thank you for proving that someone has in fact listened to this."
People only have haters if they're big enough or give enough of a reaction to somebody to actually say something. Really, the worst insult is absolute indifference.
Yeah.
But anyway,
do you have a outro prepared, or do you want me to go with my traditional tagline?
I can come up with something here. So, for all of us here at TJZ, we are here to ramble for you.